Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's World Affairs Council of New Hampshire live online event. We are bringing another interesting discussion here for you and are excited to have you with us. As always, I am Tim Horgan, and I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. Tonight is extra special because this event is being presented as a part of the Council by Council Amplified week-long festival of amazing online events. Thank you to all of the World Affairs Councils from across the country for participating in this groundbreaking effort. If you have not seen the lineup of programs for the rest of the week, there's still many more great events to check out. You can find out more at cxcamplified.com. For those of you who are not familiar with the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization located in Manchester, New Hampshire. We work to bring the state to the world and the world to the state and provide people with the opportunity to better understand the complex global issues of the day. It is our privilege to bring you such wonderful speakers who break down these issues, as you will see tonight. We also provide high school education programs, as well as an international visitor exchange program through the U.S. Department of State. As a membership organization, we do rely on the support of the community, our members, and sponsors to ensure that these programs can continue. I want to take a moment to first thank our sponsors of these online programs. Thank you very much to the John Bickford Foundation, Charles and Barbara Bickford, Stephen and Karen Barndollar, as well as Helen Taft and Peter Bowman. You too can help ensure these great programs continue through your own support of the Council. You can donate after the program here on our website, or just text WACNH to 44321, and you will be sent a link straight to your phone to create the global future we all need to be prepared for. We do hope, if you are able, that you will consider showing your support for these great programs. As a reminder, we will be taking your questions throughout the evening. You can engage with us on Facebook, Twitter, or by emailing the Council at wacnh.org. I also wanted to mention, as a nonpartisan organization, that the Council does not support or endorse any political ideas, parties, candidates, or issues. We are here as a platform for you to engage with expert speakers and leave it to you to decide what you take from these events. Therefore, the remarks by tonight's speakers are his own and do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and opinions of the Council, its staff, board, or supporters. With that now out of the way, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Manu Bhagavan is a specialist on modern India, focusing on the 20th century late colonial and post-colonial periods, with particular interest in human rights, internationalism, and questions of sovereignty. At Hunter College, where he is professor of history at the undergraduate level, he lectures on modern world history and on modern Southern Asian history, as well as offers seminars on Gandhi, modern India, and violence and ethnic conflict. His graduate classes focus on human rights and internationalism. He has previously served as the chair of the Interdisciplinary Human Rights Program based at the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute. I would now like to bring Dr. Bhagavan into the discussion.
Good evening, and Tim, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Good evening to all of our guests from around the country and around the world. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your evenings to join us for this program. And Tim and Mike Pappas and the World Affairs Council, I'd like to extend a particular word of gratitude to all of you for having me on tonight. First and foremost, I hope that everyone that is joining us remains safe and healthy in this unusual moment that we are all facing because of the coronavirus. So tonight, at the invitation of the World Affairs Council, I'm going to be speaking on a particular topic: India on the edge, authoritarianism and violence in the world's largest democracy. The topic, in a nutshell, is that a new central government headlined by the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, emerged in 2014 in India to much fanfare. This party was led by the charismatic leader, Narendra Modi. Modi had a reputation for good governance and development earned from his time as chief minister of the state of Gujarat, an important area in the west of India. But a series of concerning incidents targeting minorities and dissenting intellectuals has raised some alarms, the pattern only becoming starker following Modi's landslide re-election in 2019. The government's responses to these incidents have not been reassuring. COVID has emerged in the midst of this. What happens next will determine the fate of billions inside of India and out. The outline of my presentation this evening is as follows. I'm going to begin with some basic information about India as a country, just to give a sense of the area, peoples, and the relative importance of what we're talking about. Then I'm going to provide a basic sketch of the current government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then a quick historical background about independence and Hindu nationalism, which is an ideology which guides the current government. And then I'm going to break down in a bit more detail the first term of Modi and now his second term. And we'll end by a quick look at what's going on because of the COVID crisis, and then a final word. So very quickly, the basics. India is the 8th largest country in the world, clocking in at approximately 1/3 the size of the United States. It's approximately 83% of it is agricultural or forest land, and India has a population of approximately 1.2 billion people, second only to China, which has 1.3. When we talk about a place like this, it's important to recognize that when we talk about a country, we can sometimes falsely give the impression that it's one entity. India acts in this way, but this is a very diverse place. 2,000 ethnic groups, every major world religion, and many smaller and local ones. And 19,500 languages and dialects are spoken here, including 121 with more than 10,000 speakers. Approximately 97% speak one of 22 major languages in the country. India today has the 3rd largest GDP in the world, adjusted for purchasing power parity, behind only China and the United States. Nonetheless, within the country, approximately 5 to 3% or 50 to 40 million people are in extreme poverty, but 77% of the total national wealth is in the hands of the top 10%, and 70% of recent wealth generated has gone solely to the top 1%. India is a nuclear weapons state with a spacefaring program. The country is a parliamentary republic with 29 states and 7 union territories, and this information is in dispute now, which is one of the reasons why I want to present it to you quickly in the overview. Generally, it holds national and legislative elections every 5 years. The indirectly elected via parliament president is the head of state. That is, he or she is a constitutional figurehead. And the prime minister is elected by the lower house members of parliament with a majority. And the prime minister serves as the head of government. The current government is headed by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He is 69 years old and a larger-than-life figure. Modi rose to power with a hard-scrabble rags to riches story that should speak to many Americans. He was a tea seller and so embodies for many the so-called quote-unquote Indian dream. That he took out the dynasty of the Nehru Gandhis, long the leaders of the country and rumored to be rich and corrupt, that is, that there are rumors about this, has been icing on the cake for many. Modi was elected in 2014 and re-elected in 2019, with his BJP winning a clear majority on its own. It is part of the National Democratic Alliance, the NDA, and so its seat share and power are even greater. Modi achieved fame and infamy. During his time as chief minister of his home state of Gujarat, when he was chief minister 2001 to 2014, when he supposedly spurred innovation and investment and led to a development boom in the state. But He was dogged by rumors and legal cases that held him directly or indirectly responsible for massacres that occurred in the state in 2002, directed at the state's minority Muslim population. His defenders claimed then and continue to claim now that he was not responsible for these events and that he has been exonerated of such charges. These claims, however, remain disputed by others. Modi has been a member of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS, since he was 8 years old. His BJP party is the political arm of the RSS. The party subscribes to a right-wing Hindu nationalist agenda, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Essentially, Modi is a right-wing figure, far to the right of previous BJP Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. But waiting in the wings are his Home Minister Amit Shah and the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, India's largest state, Yogi Adityanath, who are much to the right of Modi. Now a quick historical sketch, just so we have a sense of where we are today. India achieved independence in 1947 from Great Britain, led by the efforts of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, and the Indian National Congress, which morphed into today's Congress Party, that is literally today's opposition. The Congress held power for most of independent India's life. While the Congress was dominant, there were others who opposed the Congress vision, including the Muslim League, which ultimately led to the creation of Pakistan, and the Hindu right led by the RSS and its sibling organizations. Sorry, I got a note just saying that you all could hear turning page notes, so I'm going to try to be a little quieter, move this around a little bit. Hindu nationalists emerged in the early 20th century when they grew upset about what they saw and claimed was a quote-unquote Muslim betrayal and violence that stemmed from a peasant rebellion in southwest India during the post-World War I Khilafat movement, and when this overall took on a religious color. Intellectuals in the western state of Maharashtra began to push for a new vision. In 1923, a man named V.D. Savarkar published a tract called Hindutva. In 1925, a colleague, K.B. Hedgewar, established the RSS, and in 1939, M.S. Golwalkar published It Is We. All three said only those whose fatherland and motherland were India really belonged. That is, those who had no outside loyalty. In practice, this turned into a pro-Hindu, but also Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh argument, and an anti-Muslim and anti-Christian one. The Hindu right stood for something called Akhand Hindustan, or also known as Akhand Bharat, that is, United Hindu India. Princely states, or semi-autonomous regions that made up about 2/5 of the colonial subcontinent, were seen as pure Hindu spaces, and certain places, like the princely state of Kashmir, held an important place in this imagination. The RSS was banned after Gandhi's assassination for its suspected role in his killing. In 1966, Golwalkar published a follow-up tract called A Bunch of Thoughts in order to resuscitate the RSS. Golwalkar admired what had occurred in mid-20th century Germany. A Bunch of Thoughts followed the same tenets of Hindutva with specific prescriptions to reclaim India for Hindus. Oh, sorry. Quiet. We have to be careful with turning the pages here. Okay, with that as background, now we're going to turn to the election of Narendra Modi in 2014. That is the emergence of him as a national figure, and this was his first 5-year term. Modi spent his first term rolling out a number of initiatives to much fanfare and soaking in a developing international celebrity. He fostered a reputation as a tireless worker dedicated to building India's future, centered around the slogan Sabke Saath, Sabka Vikas. That is, everyone together, progress or development for everyone. He blended nationalist rhetoric at home with a commitment to multilateralism and the liberal order abroad, and despite his age, projected a youthful, confident, aspiring India that filled many with hope and purpose. he announced campaigns like Make in India and Swachh Bharat to increase local manufacturing and to spur sanitation drives throughout the country, claiming that every Indian who wanted or needed a toilet should have one and would get one. Indeed, Modi rolled out a whole series of initiatives. You can Google them, and long lists of acronyms and particular policy rollouts will come up. What has come of them, however, has been questioned. Amongst the rollout were two particularly sensational initiatives. These involved the policies of demonetization and a national goods and services tax known as the GST. Both of these reforms were heralded as big things that would shock the Indian system and help clean it up, facilitate business, and spur growth. Demonetization took certain notes out of circulation on the premise that they were being used in the black and fostering illegal activity. The GST was meant to standardize what had been a regional, highly complex and confusing system. But both these rollouts were ill thought through and hastily rolled out themselves, and together caused catastrophic shock to the Indian economy. The GST, for example, involved many different slabs and was enormously complicated to tabulate, resulting, in fact, in more fatigue and complication for business than had been the case previously. Meanwhile, all across the country, hate crimes and other attacks on marginal communities and intellectuals began to rise, particularly picking up steam after the year 2016, in keeping with trends around the world. Now, this claim is based on metrics provided by international organizations that tabulate such things. And now, just anecdotally, some major incidents that occurred during the first term included such things as what euphemistically we call cow vigilantism. That is the idea that the cow was sacred, and there were groups of vigilante mobs that would go around accusing certain people or claiming to catch certain people, transporting cows for the purpose of sacrifice or eating or whatever, and then targeting the people involved or communities. In short, this led to a particular type of targeted violence against anyone that they claimed was involved with the transport, use, or consumption of beef. In addition, there was a campaign called Ghar Wapsi, which means homecoming, which essentially was about trying to convert people, particularly of the Muslim faith, back to Hinduism, and saying that they had been forcibly converted out of the religion, so now they were welcome back to come back to the fold. More broadly, caste violence continued to spread, where lower caste communities, particularly or notably the community known as Dalits, or the oppressed, the ground to pieces, were received particularly fierce attacks. This is best symbolized when in 2015, shortly after Modi's first term election, a politically active Dalit student named Rohit Vemula committed suicide, claiming harassment from the university authorities at the university he attended, and at the behest of a BJP member of parliament and union minister. This was followed, well, it preceded and followed by the murder of several prominent, what are called rationalists, that is, prominent intellectuals who wrote against superstition and politically motivated religion. These rationalists were killed, the first in 2013 in the lead up to the elections, and then thereafter two more in 2015 and one in 2017. Indicators point to fringe right-wing Hindu groups associated with the murders, but no one has been brought to justice as yet, and nothing, of course, has been proven one way or the other. Meanwhile, in parallel with the escalating violence, there was a push to claim Hindu achievement and ascent in all fields as with claims made in the 2014 Indian Science Congress that people of Hindu belief had invented flight, IVF, in vitro fertilization, and plastic surgery thousands of years ago. They cited certain kinds of documents to make these claims. Moreover, there was a concerted effort to undermine the history and legacy of India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, a towering world figure long heralded for his commitment to democracy, freedom, science, rationalism, and magnanimity, also known as Gandhi's heir and first lieutenant. All of this from an overall position based in the left. As part of the effort to undermine Nehru and his legacy, his achievements, accomplishments, the memory of him and his legacy overall, there are two landmark institutions in the capital city of Delhi, the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, the NMML, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Both of these are premier institutions. Attacks came underway. Both of these institutions came under attack right away, with people claiming that the NMML, that is the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, had particular problems that needed to be addressed. The museum was dedicated to the lifetimes and accomplishments of the first prime minister, and charges were that this needed to be remade into a 21st century kind of memorial, so it needed to be taken apart and an emphasis placed on all other prime ministers and not just on Nehru. In addition, the head of the institution and the executive committee were turned over. In the year 2016, several students at the premier institution, Jawaharlal Nehru University, were charged with sedition for protesting the hanging of a man named Afzal Guru, who had been accused of playing a central role in attacking the Indian parliament. Now, it has recently been discovered that a police officer had been involved in some way in the whole affair and also perhaps covered things up, pointing possibly to some larger involvements that we have yet to discover and that so far remain unknown. All of this triggered broadly what was known as the anti-national campaign. The people who defended someone like Afzal Guru, or the people who protested what they perceived to be the unfair treatment that he received, were charged with being anti-national. It happened that most of these people were students or activists, those with social awareness or social concern. As intellectuals, activists, and others came on television or on social media to defend the right to free speech, the right to protest, the right to dissent, and to talk about some of the broader issues that were involved, they were labeled the Tukde gang, or the gang to break up India. Narendra Modi himself remained supremely popular through all of these controversies, though he faced withering criticism, or at least his government did, from some quarters. It all largely proved ineffectual, as most in the country stood by him and absolved him of any direct responsibility for what was going on. How was this possible? Well, Modi maintained a studied silence on all controversial issues of this sort. He mostly confined his rhetoric to the lofty, so that he always appealed to big, broad concerns and big, broad issues, and you could never really nail him down as saying anything that was particularly discriminatory, harmful, or bad. It was all the generally positive kind of rhetoric. All of this led in May 2019 to his re-election with now a thumping majority. Things took a dramatic turn almost immediately after the beginning of what generally euphemistically is known as Modi's second innings, the term which is often deployed, the sports term, which is often deployed to refer to the second term. The government now authorized a new series of bold moves. Many of these moves have garnered headlines in India and around the world. In the summer of 2019, two major events occurred. In August, the Indian government placed prominent political leaders from the Indian state of Kashmir, including pro-India Democrats and former chief ministers, under house arrest. They imposed a communications blackout on the entire state and used an element of the Criminal Procedure Code to prevent public gatherings of more than 4 people. Significantly, they also abrogated Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution, which granted special status to the state and prevented non-Kashmiris from owning property and voting there. The state of Jammu and Kashmir was effectively eliminated and replaced with 2 union territories, Ladakh, which was going to be centrally administered, and Jammu and Kashmir, which would have a legislative assembly. Much of the lockdown has continued until this day, with only a small number of leaders thus far having been released. While the events in Kashmir took place at the outset of the month of August, the end of that same month brought new events as well. Now, on sort of the other side, the northeast Indian state of Assam released a National Registry of Citizens, or the NRC, that essentially rendered about 2 million people stateless. Plans were then announced to expand the principle involved beyond the state. In December 2019, the Indian government passed the Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA, basically offering a pathway to citizenship for undocumented but only non-Muslim migrants from neighboring states, combined with the NPR and combined with something known as the National Population Register, or a type of census, and a national registry of citizens. Many feared and continue to fear that the aim is to target certain communities and make them second-class citizens or worse. Some context for understanding why people have been concerned or continue to express concern. Modi's right-hand man, who is currently serving as the Home Minister, is known as Amit Shah. He announced just before the elections in April that the government would remove, quote, every single infiltrator in the country except anyone who was Buddhist, Hindu, or Sikh. The implication being that therefore people of particular faiths were the ones who were going to be targeted, and the message was quite clear that what he meant to say was Muslims, though he never explicitly said it himself. Meanwhile, the Supremo, the head of the RSS, a man named Mohan Bhagwat, said in October that India explicitly declared in October that India was and is a Hindu Rashtra, meaning a Hindu country, an explicitly Hindu theocracy, reiterating a long-held talking point of the RSS and its sibling organizations, which together are all known as the Sangh Parivar, the family of organizations of the right wing. And in November, the Supreme Court rendered a verdict on disputed territory in the holy city of Ayodhya in North India, holy in particular to Hindus. But not only, it also is a land that had other religious institutions and organizations, and that was partially why some of this territory was disputed. The Supreme Court essentially handed over this particular disputed site to the majority community. While all of this was happening over the past several years, media houses have been bought out by government sympathizers, and 24-hour, essentially, propaganda is broadcast on some channels, thereby helping to quote-unquote manufacture consent. People have not sat by idly as all of these things have happened. All of these actions have set off nationwide protests that seemed to be catching fire beginning in the fall of last year. In response, the government, at the national level, but also in some states, has greenlit attacks on protesters and especially on universities and students. The police have been both directly and indirectly implicated. They, in some cases, they fall under the central government. In some cases, they're directed by states. These events have extended all the way until February of 2020, bringing us to the moment at which the coronavirus took over the headlines. COVID-19 is now the dominant issue in the country of India as it is in countries around the world. The pandemic has locked down the country. Modi has again received praise for his swift action. At the same time, once more, steps were taken without necessarily enough planning, and millions now of migrant laborers have been left to fend for themselves, many trekking long distances by foot to try to get home. There has not really been an effective coordinated response to this problem yet, though some press coverage and maneuvers by some politicians, particularly in the opposition, have begun to draw light to these issues, and a major concert was just held to also help raise some funds. In fact, not just a major concert, the largest, I believe, concert of its sort ever held in India. Online, of course. There are also questions being raised as to whether the pandemic is serving as cover for even more explicit erosion of democratic norms, as has been happening elsewhere in the world, as for instance in Hungary or the Philippines. Which brings us to the last several weeks. Now, under the cover of COVID, notable intellectuals and social activists continue to be arrested. For instance, most notably, the Dalit scholar Anand Teltumbde was arrested. Anand is the grandson by marriage of one of India's leading figures from the period of independence, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And he was arrested or made to report to jail on a major holiday celebrating Ambedkar. Secondly, a new app has been released called the Arogya Setu, the Health Bridge. This has been launched to help with pandemic tracing. But experts and a leader of the opposition have raised alarms that it is essentially a sophisticated surveillance system that erodes privacy, and in the context of all that is going on, raises further concerns. To show that these are not just loosely tied together incidents, the US Commission on Religious Freedom released its annual report just a few days ago. And in it, it seriously downgraded India's position, noting that the country was, quote, perhaps the steepest and most alarming fall from grace of any other country in the world at this time. It listed India as, quote, a country of particular concern, a status, it said, reserved only for, quote, the worst of the worst. North Korea, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia are some other countries that are also in this category. India, therefore, is on the edge. Now, a full and clear disclaimer. The government, for its part, maintains that its aim is simply to put an end to what it has long called, quote, false secularism, and to bring about thereby real fairness and justice to all people in India. For his part, the Prime Minister remains supremely popular as people continue to express their unfettered admiration for him. Where do things go from here? And I hope we can talk about some of this in the Q&A that's about to follow. Well, COVID, importantly, has scrambled dynamics again, and with some questions now being raised about neighboring China's response to the COVID crisis initially, and about current supply chain weaknesses, India seems strategically positioned to play a key role in vaccine production when we finally get around to it, and could also be positioned for economic, military, and geopolitical advantage in the weeks, months, and years to come. Much, however, will depend on how things actually unfold and whether the government chooses to pull back from the precipice or whether they decide to take India fully over the cliff. Thank you, and I look forward now to speaking with all of you through the Q&A session.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bhagavan. That was a wonderful discussion. We're really looking forward to getting people's questions. As you can see on your screen now, as just a reminder, you can send your questions to council@wacnh.org or connect with us on Twitter or Facebook. We'll get your questions into the queue and see how many we can get through with the time we have left here today. So let me put that down and we will go to our questions. You talked a lot about what's going on with COVID-19, and we've of course got a couple of questions here on that. Let me find the one that I wanted to run through. Here we go. So first, will COVID-19 result in a shift in power in India? If so, how?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very difficult, as you can imagine at this time, to predict what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, let alone what's going to happen in the coming weeks or months. Really, we simply don't have enough information to answer that question. One of the reasons we don't have enough information is because it remains unclear how COVID-19 is playing out in the country and what its ultimate impact will be. India has locked down and is suffering some economic consequences because of the lockdown, as places around the world are doing. But there remains some questions as to exactly the impact of the virus. With lockdown in place, nonetheless, there are many people who don't have access to proper or full sanitation and are unable to maintain social distancing. They don't have access to personal protective equipment like masks. So nonetheless, as far as we can tell now, while cases are on the rise, we're unclear if, in fact, the impact so far seems to be under expectations. The reason why this is so also would be unclear. Some medical professionals, that's not me, have speculated that this includes things like the fact that there is mass vaccination against tuberculosis with the BCG vaccination, that prior exposure to certain other kinds of diseases may have provided a general form of immune response, which may be helpful. It could be, but looking less likely these days, that the weather, high temperatures and humidity can play a role in slowing the transmission, not killing, but slowing the transmission rate of COVID. And there are some other possible factors as well. Nonetheless, COVID is spreading in the country and there are deaths. One state in particular has, without a doubt, done the absolute best job. That's the southern Indian state of Kerala, which is under an opposition government. That state, that's relevant and not relevant. I mean, this particular chief minister and his health officials have been on top of the crisis from the very beginning, and have basically been able to keep the curve flat and to keep death rates basically in the basement. He's heralded across the country for his response, as is his larger team. And some people are talking about taking that to a wider model. As in terms of explicitly answering your question, will this result in a political change in India? Too soon to tell. The main opposition leader, a man named Rahul Gandhi, and his family have been making some efforts to push the government to change some of their policies. They have taken up the cost of trying to get migrant laborers home, and Rahul Gandhi, is engaged in a set of conversations with prominent economists to help set some policy discussions on where the country can go from here. Nonetheless, Modi himself continues to acquire accolades for his strong leadership. So if I had to guess right this moment, I wouldn't say that leadership change is on the horizon, but it is possible.
Okay, our next question comes similarly. What are India's plans for dealing with future pandemics?
I'm, again, difficult to tell right now, but I will say that a few days ago, India held what was called the Eye for India concert. And it involved India's leading figures from Bollywood, entertainment, business, and the diaspora, as well as some figures from Hollywood. Together, they raised awareness of COVID-19, health care questions in general, and raised money to try to deal with the crisis. In doing so, they've spurred a national conversation. As, of course, is happening elsewhere in the world, COVID-19 is the only thing that everyone is talking about. And so there is questions about, India has a terrific generic pharmaceutical industry. And India is in line to be able to produce first to manufacture actual vaccine doses once the vaccine has been discovered, and also perhaps to manufacture a range of other treatments if it becomes necessary, as well as gearing up its own sort of facilities and healthcare systems. So I can't explicitly answer the question, but generally I think the conversation has begun. It is a fruitful one, and as you can imagine, there are many flaws in the Indian system, particularly in terms of public health care, but it is equally true that there are phenomenal people in the world of healthcare and in the medical profession in India, and they are on the case.
Okay, moving away from our COVID-19 discussion, Haran, a PhD student at Kent University, would like to know about Arundhati Roy's has termed the BJP's recent anti-Muslim activities as a genocidal approach. What are your thoughts on those comments?
I would say that genocide involves the targeted elimination of a particular community. It's something all of us, everywhere around the world who are concerned with human rights, always have on our radar as something we wish to avoid at all costs. And there are many mechanisms in countries that are constitutional democracies and internationally that are designed to prevent that from happening. What I would say is that I would point to the pattern of events that I spoke about, and that it is very clear that they raise red flags for many people about the security of minorities in the country, that many of them feel unsafe, and many of them feel particularly targeted. And many observers have also commented that this appears the case. And as I noted, in particular, that the US Commission on Religious Freedom has officially declared India to have a problem in this area. And this should raise alarms in the country and around the world, and we want to make sure that this tide of violence is stemmed.
Along the same lines, we have a question asking, how have the recent citizenship changes been received by the international community? i.e., has there been any backlash, particularly by India's closest allies?
I think the citizenship question right now has receded from people's minds because the only thing on people's minds is the coronavirus. But it was certainly true that for the last several months, the citizenship question was the primary one that people were concerned with, and that it continued to garner more and more attention. For example, a well-known author named Atish Tasir was an international citizen of India. That is what's called, he's an NRI that had what's called an overseas citizenship card. And he wrote something that was critical of the government as the cover of Time magazine. And then a case followed which pulled the card away from him and raised questions about what citizenship means and how it and how permanent it might be. Now, the OCI card is really more of a visa, and his particular case is one that has other issues involved in it. But by and large, we agree that this seemed like political payback, and certainly raised flags of concern and seems unwarranted to most observers. The broader question is, again, coming back to the question of citizenship, what exactly is going on? What is the end game? Who's being targeted? Who is a citizen of India? And what is the notion? What is the future for citizenship in the country? Have countries or allies raised questions? I would say certainly the media internationally began to raise questions. Many people domestically as well. There were landmark protests, particularly by women in the city of Delhi, but around the country from students and others as well, organized and unorganized protests against these acts, against these citizenship changes, and against the larger efforts behind them. But as I say, it seemed to be moving full steam ahead, and then it seemed to be gaining some momentum with occasional stalls when COVID-19 hit, and now is off of everyone's radar, even if it's, well, or at least moved to the background.
Great. So our next question. Sounds like we're getting a little bit of feedback. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this next question comes from one of our members. You seem to suggest that India today is dominated by a right-wing agenda. How does that play out on the world stage today, and what does it mean for the balance of power between world powers?
Please forgive me if I suggested that. I don't mean to suggest it. I mean to say it explicitly. It is dominated by a right-wing agenda. That's not a controversial statement. The BJP sees itself as a right-wing party, as a right-of-center party. And commentators have long talked about India's need for a right-of-center party, and that's the role that the BJP has long sought to play and has long sought to, the market it has sought to corner. How does this play out? Well, I think it's absolutely fair to say that Modi has a cult of personality, that he has a particular brand, and that brand is the brand value is worth a lot. He himself can carry his political party and his agenda over the finish line, or over multiple finish lines in multiple races. And so with this cult of personality, and with the kind of power he has in the parliament, and with the kind of aggressive agenda he has, he displays all the tendencies, all the hallmarks of a strongman. In the first term, that strongman politics were clearly working within the normal parameters of constitutional democracy. In the second term, obviously, when you're going to do things like abrogate elements of the Constitution, then you raise serious questions as to what exactly your intentions are. Most people have drawn parallels between Modi and sort of the late first term and second term things he's been doing, and one of his predecessors, ironically Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, who officially declared an emergency, suspending the Constitution from 1975 to 1977, and people have likened what is happening to an unofficial emergency in the country today. How does he compare to the moment that we see around the world? Well, I would first say it's clear that we are living through, broadly in the world, a global authoritarian moment. I mentioned Viktor Orban, there's Duterte in the Philippines, but there's also obviously what is going on in the United States, and similar examples basically everywhere you look. Either these authoritarians have seized power, gained power, or are on track to do so, or are continuing to contest from a variety of vantage points. This is something I myself have written about for several years, and if you're interested, I'm sure you can Google and find some of the things to that effect.
All right. Our next question is about US and American relations. Is India a friend or foe of American interests? And what are the dangers for the future?
Very good question. And it's one of these things that, Tim, you'll have to make sure that I don't go over, a soundbite kind of an answer of maybe a minute or two, because it's the kind of thing that I can now that it's been asked, I can off to the races and go on for another hour or two, sort of warming up, and then teach a whole course on it for the semester. So in a nutshell, what I would say is that India famously had a policy called non-alignment during the Cold War, where it was situated between the United States and the Soviet Union. Many people incorrectly characterize India as leaning towards the Soviet Union in the conflict. In fact, India's policy of non-alignment was a plank in its larger agenda. Non-alignment was a proactive policy which was meant to foster friendship with both the United States and the Soviet Union. And India, therefore, it is safe to say, from its inception as an independent country, has long sought to have positive relationships with the United States. Positive relationships have never meant that the country would always agree. And it never saw itself as a lapdog, and it never saw itself formally as an ally being a country that would simply go along when told to do so by a peer. But it did always argue that it had the best interests of the United States at heart, that it sought its friendship, and that it sought to foster positive relationships, and where feasible, possible, and willing, they would defend shared values. Those shared values have always been liberty, democracy, and broader issues of social justice. In terms of recent activity, it's very difficult to say whether or not India and the United States are on the same page, because unfortunately the President of the United States does not make clear where he, thereby representing the interests of this country, the United States, stands. He seems to thumb his nose at long-held allies and to embrace others with problematic politics. This, to the point of the talk, therefore, I suppose, begs the question as to why President Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have had a particularly good, positive relationship throughout the tenure of the president in power. I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to answer more or to discuss further in follow-up.
So you mentioned that President Trump has yet to make officially clear how the relationship is. Our next question comes in asking, what has the position taken by the US State Department been on India's drift to right-wing extremism?
This is, again, a question that is a bit difficult to answer for a couple of different reasons. The State Department has suffered a number of setbacks in recent years, and long-standing policy or chains of command, or we know who says what, that has been eroded somewhat. And diplomats on the ground sometimes appear to be at odds with officials in charge of the State Department and in higher-ups in the US government. I would say, broadly speaking, that US diplomats have sought to foster positive relations with the country as a whole for all of the reasons that I laid out at the very outset of my presentation. India is simply too large, too economically and militarily important, and has too much geopolitical strategic value to be simply criticized and sent off to the side. So they've sought to foster positive relations, even as they have. It's not so much about right and left, because in a democratic society, you're going to have a range of, you're going to have a spectrum of ideology, and you're going to have a range of opinions. That would be quite normal. So it isn't about right and left so much as beyond the pale activities that involve targeted violence against particular communities. Those kinds of activities are things that the international community has the ability to express concern about and should.
Okay, with just about 5 minutes left, I'm going to put two questions to you because they're fairly related. With the close relationship between Modi and Trump, have the US government and private companies moved to replace China as the major consumer, supplier to US importers and our government agencies? As well as what are the current impediments in India and with the US-China access to making this economic shift a reality?
No, to the first question, India has not replaced China. That's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do because China, well, China is a very, very unique country with capabilities that few can match. The best illustration of this, I suppose, just to sort of give us a visual in our mind, is the way it built hospitals in 10 days from nothing, from dirt to fully constructed hospitals and ready to go in just 10 days. I mean, that's a remarkable achievement. And it symbolizes the basically the incredible tenacity, drive, and achievement potential that China, the way it can direct resources and people to a problem in a hurried way. To my mind, at least, no other country or very few can match that, and I don't think that India is one of them. So so China has some advantages that would be very difficult for a country like India or anywhere else to really overcome. However, China has some things that raise issues. One of them is a lack of transparency and accountability fostered by its form of government. But sadly, what that also implies is that India's greatest strength is its commitment to freedom and democracy, the very things that appear to have been under erosion over the last several years. Only by only by not doubling down on its current course of action and by reversing course, embracing its core values, its original ideals, can the country, I think, really seriously make a challenge to China and to move the ball forward in its claim that it alone, India now, is strategically situated to take advantage of the situation and to be an asset to the larger supply chain issues. The last question was, what does India need to do to make this an economically viable possibility? I'd say that the answer to that is twofold. One is a non-political answer. India needs some further economic restructuring. And that was indeed what many people had held out hope in the first term that Modi might be able to accomplish because he was so energetic, because the claims to development were what many people associated with him during his time as the chief minister, even if it was contested by many others. So many people had held out hope, I believe, that he would be able to foster economic reforms in his first term. And when that has failed, and indeed when he sort of fumbled the ball, many are now ready to accept, perhaps, that basically the country is at least exactly where it was several years ago, if not even a bit further behind. So that's the non-political answer. The political answer, I would say, is that the other thing that India needs to do besides embrace certain kinds of economic reforms is also to recommit itself to basic values. These basic values are not Western ones, nor are they particularly Eastern ones. They're universal ones. They're ones that India as a country has long committed to. They're universal human rights, and they're universal principles of civil and political liberties and economic and social and cultural rights. Only these things in combination can deliver India the true power and freedom that it needs in order to be able to achieve the great power status that it seeks.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Manu, for your wonderful insights. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today as part of our WACNH Live series, as well as the Council by Council Amplified programming that is going on all this week. We're really excited that the network has come together in such a way to provide so many amazing experiences and opportunities to learn from wonderful people like Dr. Bhagavan. We want to thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you will join us for our next WACNH Live event on May 19th with the One World campaign. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.